This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Jeff Timmer. Welcome to the having to repeatedly brag about your cognitive dementia tests isn't quite the flex he thinks it is.
A lion, a giraffe, a bear, and a shark.
Episode of A Republic, if you can keep it. In between Oval Office naps, his costly, tacky fixations on the reflecting pool in the National Mall and his $1 billion now taxpayer-funded ballroom at the White House, misogyny toward female reporters, rage posting on Truth Social, his bizarre constant bragging about his regularly scheduled dementia tests, and stuffing his pockets full of payola from domestic and foreign tycoons and potentates, Donald Trump did the Democrats a huge favor this week, voicing a soon-to-be Democratic campaign commercials in every competitive state and district across the fruited plain.
To what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody.
I'm Mark Brewer, with a caveat to our listeners that you should look at polling trends, not individual polls. There was a new poll out this week paid for by the Greater Detroit Chamber of Commerce, which shows the Chamber's endorsed candidate Mike Duggan now trailing Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. The same poll said it's a virtual three-way tie for the Democrats' U.S. Senate nomination. And yet another poll, paid for by Mears News, shows Benson's lead in a three-way race growing to 12 points.
The two leading Republican candidates for governor are engaged in a reprise of the sad GOP song of 4 years ago, problems with nominating petition signatures. But John James and Perry the Quality Guru Johnson aren't the only Republicans with unplanned campaign hiccups. 1st District Congressman Jack Bergman faces possible ethics violation charges over extracurricular money-making efforts by his congressional staff. And U.S. Senate candidate Mike Rogers has some unseemly ties to child sex predators with his campaign.
And in the Macomb County-based 10th District, one of the Republican candidates is accused of not only lying about where he lives on his state paperwork, but also accused of having forged petition signatures. It all adds up to a interesting couple of weeks, the next 2 weeks, with the Bureau of Elections and the State Board of Canvassers.
In this week's chapter of Trump's perpetual grifting, it looks like the highly promoted but non-existent Trump cell phone ain't going to happen. The 600,000 true believers / rubes who put down deposits of $100 seem unlikely to get their money back.
Also new on the Trump perpetual grifting beat, the BBC reports that Trump is selling sponsorships of his oh-so-tacky UFC match at the White House for up to $1.5 million each. No word on who gets the money, but that isn't hard to guess. The Wall Street Journal revealed that Trump is considering 250 pardons in conjunction with the USA 250 celebration. So far, no pardon prices have been announced, but they can't be far behind. Trump's being sued in Florida for his plans to have a for-profit hotel inside his presidential museum on land given to him by the state that's worth around $67 million. Construction of the above-ground portion of his ballroom is underway in direct violation of a court order, and preliminary work has begun on his Arc de Trump, without the legally required authorization. It's just another routine week in Washington, D.C.
Inflation has soared to its highest level in 3 years and shows every sign of climbing higher and higher. Trump's response, as usual, is to promise that things will get lots better just a little bit later.
We're going to have a gusher of oil, and you're going to have inflation that goes way down.
Inflation will die tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be none.
Just short term.
Tomorrow, I promise tomorrow. Inflation will be done.
But our inflation is just short term.
And in the good news, bad news department, 81-year-old Rudy Giuliani has recovered from the pneumonia that sent him to the ICU last week. We're both happy that he has survived that medical crisis, but the bad news is that he's now able to resume his podcast.
You mentioned, we should talk about the polling trends and not get fixated on individual polls. Same with the economic news, like the inflation reports or the non-existent GDP growth, or the very anemic jobs market, things like that. We need to look at the trends, and the trends have, for now 16 months since Trump began his second term in the White House, have been awful for Republicans and getting worse. It really, when you look at the preponderance of evidence out there, this is shaping up right now. I think we're about 25 weeks away from the election. And it's really hard to see things changing much for Republicans, certainly changing in a way that will offer them the opportunity for victories in many competitive states, districts all across the country, certainly here in Michigan. But the trajectory of all these numbers show that things are just getting worse, that they're not likely to get better, because the underlying force that is causing all of this it's all self-inflicted. It's all being done by Donald Trump with the complete acquiescence and enabling by the Republican Party. Every elected Republican member of Congress in the U.S. Senate, as well as Republican governors and legislators all across the country, are just drinking the Kool-Aid, where that Kool-Aid is poisonous to voters. Yet they're just lapping it up. They can't stop. They have such a paradoxical situation. They can't alienate their base, but they can't continue to abide by this and have chances to win. And we're not talking in toss-up districts anymore, or districts that just lean Democratic. We're talking Trump plus 15, Trump plus 20 districts where incumbents have to be nervous. You look at what they call the generic ballot test. We've have 3 national polls out this week that show the generic is now in significant double digits in favor of the Democrats, plus 15 in this Signal poll that came out today. And that it shows that independent voters, Democrats are favored by like a plus 28, plus 29 margin. That is unlike anything I've seen in my nearly 40 years watching this. It's like a wow. I mean, I know this is just today and just this week. We've put all the asterisk on this, but wow. It's got to get not only better for the Republicans, it has to get significantly night and day better, or they're not just going to lose majorities in the U.S. Congress, in the U.S. Senate. They're going to lose legislative chambers. They're going to lose districts and races across the country that in most election years would never happen. That's the kind of, like, we saw a similar wave. We've had them going, benefiting one party or the other over history. You think back to the 1994 midterm wave where Republicans were just winning. Just by this is the Republicans that year there was one important criteria that they had to meet as a candidate in order to win, and that was a pulse. And Democrats are getting into that kind of environment now, where as long as they have a candidate who's alive or recently was so, they've got a shot to win just about any district except the reddest of the red districts. Everything else becomes competitive. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, Jeff, you're right. This is a year, you and I have given this kind of advice before, where we tell our respective parties, be sure you fill all the slots on the ballot, because lightning could strike, given this climate they're in. I want to focus for a minute. You're actually right about the politics. I want to focus on the economic trends. I mean, let's start where Trump started, right? Promised an economic boom. right? When he was running for president, gas prices will plummet to $2 a gallon. Grocery prices will plummet. It's going to be happy days are here again in the United States. And it's been nothing but downhill since that time. He started off with the tariffs, and we're still dealing with a hangover from that. He lost another tariff court battle this week, but he continues to insist that he can impose these tariffs. He's going to have to refund money that he wrongfully collected. And so there's all kinds of chaos there. But so we had that kind of economic chaos, disruption of our trade relationships all around the world, and now exacerbated by what's going on with his war of choice in Iran. You and I have talked about this, and people observe this. A lot of times, elected officials, presidents, governors, others, get the blame for things that they can't control. Well, that's not what's going on here. Trump is the cause of this. There is no doubt about it. And the voters get that. You see that in the consumer confidence numbers and everything else. They understand the connection between what Trump has done with his Iran war and how they're suffering with higher gas prices, grocery prices, and the ripple effect that causes. And I think the Iranians have figured out, and they figured it out before. They've known this, and now they've rediscovered it, that by inflicting this kind of economic pain on an American president, they can affect our elections. I think that's clearly where we're headed. Even if the strait were to open tomorrow, it would take months to untangle the damage, if it's ever going to be untangled, from this massive disruption, this unprecedented disruption. And, people think, well, it's just oil. No, it affects all aspects of the economy. You move products with diesel fuel, right? You fuel planes with oil. It's just a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. It demonstrates how energy dependent we all are, and there's no immediate substitute for that. So again, I focused here for the moment just on the economic environment out there, but it has created the kind of political environment that you described. I mean, I remember what James Carville back from the 1992 campaign of Clinton. It's the economy, stupid. It always is the economy, stupid. You either get the benefit from a good economy or you get punished for a bad one, whether it's your fault or not. And this one is clearly Trump's fault. And it's amazing to see, Jeff, not only Trump, but these Republicans, including here, Mike Rogers and these other candidates here, insisting that things are going to be fine. We're going to get through this. There's a bright side on the other side of the rainbow or whatever it is I think is coming. And then Trump himself this week says, well, I can't care about the economic situation of the American people when I'm dealing with Iran. I mean, talk about tone deaf. And it's going to come back to haunt them. And I think a lot of stuff now, we're in the middle of May. It's almost Memorial Day. Primaries are happening. This stuff is getting baked in. Unless I don't see any kind of dramatic event, even ending the war in the Middle East, that may boost the stock market, but that doesn't help the average worker. They don't care. A lot of the pundits and elites focus on the stock market. Doesn't help people get a job. Doesn't help people put groceries on the table. What they're worried about is inflation and the pessimism that all this has induced. Consumer confidence is at a multi-year low. So again, the trend, you look at all these economic indicators and the trend is very, very bad, not only for the economy itself, but obviously the economic consequences of that as well.
Yeah, and that kind of economic data, that news, the self-inflicted nature of it, it's manifesting itself in these polls. The Republicans and Trump are upside down on every important issue that matters. On the economy, they can't even see their way back to parity with the Democrats. Even on immigration.
Yeah.
They are so far underwater on what was their bread and butter issues. And if you take economy, crime, and border, national security, they don't have a leg to stand on. That was kind of their three-leg stool. They don't have a single leg to stand on, and it is just absolutely astounding. And it accounts for what we've seen now. To anybody out there who says, "Oh, the Democratic brand is bad," I'm not going to argue with you. But it doesn't matter right now because the Democratic brand is really one thing. It's not Trump. It's not Republican. And it's the only viable choice. We can talk about that. some other episode, but it's a binary choice in the U.S. system. That Mike Duggan is finding that out too. What these polls show, his support is contracting, which you and I have thought was inevitable all along. An independent candidate it's like a leprechaun unicorn or something like that. People, it's this magical, mythical creature, an independent that can win. It just doesn't happen in real elections. It happens so infrequently. It would stun me, most observers, if Mike Duggan were not third place when this is all said and done, unless the Republican brand becomes even worse, in which case Duggan will pick up more and more Republican votes, and the Republican candidate will lose more and more votes. One of the things that the Democrats have to do is avoid overconfidence. Last week, we talked about finding that sweet spot between being aggressively on the offense, but finding that sweet spot where you avoid spreading your resources and playing field so far that you risk not doing enough in too many races to bring them over the top, that you can get to 48, 49% in a whole lot of races, but not complete the deal. That's where the Democrats find themselves now. Jocelyn Benson, whoever the nominee is for the U.S. Senate in Michigan, whoever the nominee is in the 7th Congressional, for instance, the environment is so strong for them at this point in time. They have to avoid overconfidence and make sure that they focus on the fundamentals and just let Trump continue defeating the Republicans. Because that's really what Trump is doing. Trump and MAGA Inc. have this like $300 million war chest that's sitting out there, that there have been articles in Politico and other sources written about. When are they going to unleash their money and start helping Republicans? They might not. We'll have to wait and see. Is that money becomes impossible to put enough candidates over the top to make a difference, they're going to start to look at what they can do to preserve some resources to fight the environment that they'll find themselves in 2027, they being the White House, which will be under siege from a Democratic-controlled U.S. House, Democratic-controlled U.S. Senate, looking to provide that oversight and accountability and hold Trump and the administration accountable for their overreach, for their crimes, for their ignoring the law, the statutorily appropriated resources, whatever it is. When you look at these boondoggles like the reflecting pool at the National Mall that Trump is turning into a cement pond out behind the Clampett's house with a no-bid contract to a buddy of his, and then looking to do the same thing with this gaudy, tacky Kim Jong-un Arc de Triomphe or whatever that has to be the biggest, because, Trump has to compensate. Trump is the kind of guy that would, be driving one of those big jacked up trucks with the big tires, that they call micro penis cars. He's clearly compensating for his lack of confidence here. With everything has to be bigger and better to make him feel good. He's focused on all the wrong things. Republicans or voters are focused on all the right things, which is, oh my God, we can't pay for groceries. We can't fill up our gas tanks. And Trump's just going to keep making it worse.
Yeah, Jeff, this is the kind of year when I was chair, and I'm sure you saw the same thing on your side of the aisle, when I would tell candidates, don't relax, actually run harder, run faster, run through the tape.
Yep.
And take advantage of this environment. Don't overreach, but take advantage of the environment. I think a Democratic trifecta is possible again in this climate. Democrats run on the right issues, and I know they've filled all the legislative spots with good candidates. So they've done everything they can do so far to do that. They're going to face an onslaught of money on the other side, whether it's in the U.S. Senate race and the governor's race or whatever, trying to push back. But in this kind of climate, money doesn't carry you very far. The other thing that I think Republicans are starting to think about already is that what can we salvage from this year? right? Do we focus our attention on a ballot proposal, right? Or two? What do we try to salvage that we can use to rebuild on coming up? Again, I don't want to be presumptuous here or anything else like that. But when you're thinking long term, looking toward November, and you see these numbers, you see this political climate, you say, well, what am I going to invest in that's not just throwing my money away, right? What are we going to do to protect what we can and, look for a better year in 2028 or 2030? So I think those are the kind of considerations that are starting to go through people's minds as, the playing field shifts in the Democrats' direction up and down the ballot. I mean, I think it does that. You mentioned the point about Duggan. I mean, we see Democrats consolidating behind Benson. She's clearly going to be the nominee. And even though she's got statewide name recognition, having run twice statewide, Duggan has also spent, he's had spent on his behalf, I think we're running about $15 million at this point on his behalf. And he's working. He's out there. He's all over social media. He's traveling the state. But, he's not moving. And if anything, he's moving backwards as Democrats consolidate behind Benson. And it seems like now he's actually maybe taking more votes from the Republicans than he is from Democrats. But again, we'll have to see how that all plays out. So I think he faces some tough choices too. He's talking about, he's going to file his petitions. He claims he's got 25,000. He's shooting for 30. And he's got till middle of July to file those. But, what does this look like? I think Mackinac Island in a couple weeks at the conference is going to be very interesting. I mean, clearly the Detroit Chamber's big in his corner, and they're going to try to celebrate him. Maybe they should be holding a funeral. I don't know. A wake, because at this point, it doesn't look like they can certainly win, or maybe even play a spoiler role. Well, again, we'll just have to see how this all plays out. But the record of independent candidates in this state is very poor, very, very poor. It's why people don't run as independents, because it's so difficult to win or even have an impact on the election.
Yeah. The U.S. Senate race has gotten some attention with these polls because they're much closer. Mike Rogers, the Republican nominee, the second-time nominee, he lost a close race to Alyssa Slotkin in 2024 when the environment was good for him. It's not good for him now. And I think the trend here that people ought to look at, the Rogers campaign and Republicans are all over social media saying, Mike Rogers is in the lead. He's, 1, 2, 3 points ahead of Mallory McMorrow, Abdul El Sayed, and Haley Stevens. They ought to be shitting their pants when they look at those numbers with Mike Rogers at about 42, 43%, because John Doe or, Mark Brewer or Jeff Timmer on the ballot as the Republican nominee would get those same numbers. Right. Mike Rogers had $75 million or more spent on his behalf a year and a half ago in the U.S. Senate race. He's run statewide recently with a massive war chest spent to help him get that name ID. And none of the candidates have run statewide in a general election. El Sayed ran statewide in a primary election nearly a decade ago. Not equivalent. That he's showing up like a generic candidate in a statistical tie with three candidates who voters are largely almost completely unaware of. And there haven't been spending advertising yet on behalf of them. That is not a sign of strength that Mike Rogers has a arguable slight statistical lead in May, when he should have a commanding lead because he's the only known candidate. Right. That's a sign of one, how bad the environment is, and two, how lousy Mike Rogers' campaign is. I mean, he's out there this week and launching some ad about how schools need to bring back shop class. Yeah, because that's what we need in a 21st economy to really turn Michigan around, is a bunch of kids making paper towel holders with a lathe. That's going to really fix Michigan's education and put us, primed to compete with the world in the 21st century. He just doesn't have the it that this moment requires. And I think that's what these polls show. He is is showing up like a generic Republican, but his campaign messaging is a generic Republican from like 1992. Really sounds tired, old, cliche, platitude, nothing that's going to excite not only his Republican base, but the general election voters. Why he's different. He's still leaning into Donald Trump is doing the right thing. And this,
Right.
we're going to make this gas prices nothing to worry about. The economy, nothing to worry about. Trump's got it. All right, Mike, you've hitched your wagon to Trump. See how that goes.
Yeah, no, he's going to get hit with that pretty badly. No, those ads are so out of touch, Jeff. And when a voter sees them, he's not talking about what's important to me, which is I can't afford to fill a tank on my truck. I can't afford to put groceries on the table and take care of my family. And he's talking about shop class. Yeah, no, that is so, it's beyond tone deaf in terms of those ads. And you're right. He's basically right. His numbers indicate that he's a generic Republican. Any Republican name that you put in there would get those numbers. And for three relatively unknown Democrats, one of them represents half a congressional district, one of them represents a congressional district, and one of them doesn't represent a district at all. But yet they're neck and neck with him before any communication has started. It's a good sign for the Democrats. I can't take anything for granted. This is going to be a close Senate race, but it's a winnable Senate race for those Democrats because Mike Rogers has not taken advantage of the fact that he's the sole candidate. There's no primary there. And you're right. He comes off this launching pad of this massive spending in 2024 in a very close election. But it doesn't seem to have benefited him, and he doesn't seem to be working to take advantage of that prior investment.
More on a republic if you can keep it after these messages.
Then I have no choice.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we're here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve on Michigan's public policy landscape? Look no further than Michigan Information and Research Service Incorporated, or MERS. MERS is your go-to source for comprehensive, nonpartisan news and analysis on Michigan's government and public policy. But that's not all. A MERS subscription also gives you access to our powerful legislative monitoring and tracking tools. Stay on top of every bill, amendment, and vote with real-time updates, detailed reports, interactive committee transcripts, legislative analysis tools, and more. Whether you're a policymaker, lobbyist, or just a concerned citizen, MERS keeps you informed with daily updates, exclusive interviews, and detailed reports. Subscribe today and gain access to our extensive archives. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead with MERS. Visit MERS.news to learn more and subscribe. That's MIRS.news. Don't miss out on the insights that matter most.
Jeff, why don't we give a preview to our listeners of what's going to happen in front of the Board of Canvassers over the next couple of weeks. We had filing deadline a couple of weeks ago. The staff of the board has been reviewing petition signatures, reviewing affidavits of identity, and there are 2 going to be very lengthy board meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks at which they're going to consider whether these candidates qualify for the ballot. And so there's going to be a lot to watch there. As we mentioned in some of our opening remarks, there have been challenges of forgery again, and there's a huge fight going on between John Janes and Perry Johnson, both accusing each other of forging their petitions. We'll see how that plays out and whether people have enough signatures to make the ballot, as well as in some of these down ballot races. There's similar allegations. You've been there. I've been an advocate in front of that board, but you've been on the board. What is it going to be like for somebody like you for the next couple of weeks as you deal with all these candidates who want to get on the ballot?
Long and tedious with not much happening is what's going to happen at these meetings. The process of determining validity of the signatures during my time there, we didn't have that to the extent that we see now. There's claims from the opposing candidates of campaigns of John James and Perry Johnson that their opponents have the same forgery problems. That's going to be very, very interesting to watch. But I don't think it's likely to change the lineup that voters will see on the August primary ballot. I would be very surprised at this point if either John James or Perry Johnson. I think I would be as surprised as they are, or they would be, if they were thrown off the ballot, and they would be gobsmacked at this point. Where I think the attention is going to start to turn, and I know you do too, is after the early talk last year of a whole lot of potential ballot issues out there, circulating petitions to either initiated legislation or constitutional amendments, we're down to what might be 3. But the one thing we know for sure will be on the ballot is the Constitutional Convention question that appears automatically every 16 years. That's Proposal 1. Proposal 2 looks like it would be the citizens voting pushed by Trump and the MAGAs. They turned in what they claim is 750,000 signatures a month or so ago. And a center-left progressive-sponsored ballot initiative to get certain money, or ban certain money, regulated utilities and companies with big contracts from the state, regulate how they and what they can give in terms of political or campaign donations, and also force some of the so-called dark money out into the open. Right. That money out of politics ballot issue, they're going to turn in their signatures by May 27th. They're going to have, I would anticipate, more than 500,000, or considerably more than 500,000 signatures. And that's what the Board of Elections, or Bureau of Elections, and the board will be dealing with over the summer, is the battle for the sufficiency of those signatures. And do both, none of those ultimately make the ballot? It's hard to say, given you have to look at the mix of paid signatures versus volunteer signatures versus who the paid signatures went to, because a lot of the paid circulators that are out there in this industry, the ones who are left aren't the ones who were convicted of the fraudulent signatures stemming from the 2022 campaign. But a lot of the circulators were hired by those. They all run this, all part of the same big operation out there of people who do this. And they're not doing their job better. They're just trying to figure out how they can keep getting paid doing the same kind of thing. Campaigns that rely too heavily on paid signatures alone haven't yet shown that they can withstand a challenge. We'll see. 750,000, you have to have a shit ton of errors to be wrong there and be thrown off the ballot. That's a constitutional amendment. The second proposal we're talking about is initiated legislation. The threshold is lower. They don't need 750,000 or as many signatures turned in order to have enough to qualify. It's hard to see them losing 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 of their signatures when this is all said and done. I would expect that we're going to see 3 issues on the ballot this fall. We'll have the Republicans and their allies, the Trumps, White House and RNC, lining up behind the citizen voting, and a lot of the Democrats. There's some dissension there and some concern, but most of the Democrats lining up behind the money out of politics. And at the end of the day, given the enormity of the partisan races and the importance of the outcome, not just in Lansing, but in Washington, and this larger fight for the preservation of our nation, the soul of our republic, it's hard to imagine these ballot initiatives breaking through to the dominant level we've seen some previous midterm ballot initiatives. But I don't see either of them having the kind of spending behind them ultimately that would, in a statewide race, that would be even equivalent to a targeted congressional race. That's how I see it at this point.
Well, I'm going to dissent a little bit there, Jeff. I think on this Michiganders from Mariana politics, I think the utilities and state contractors too, but utilities in particular, are going to throw everything they can at those signatures, try to keep it off the ballot. And if it gets on the ballot, I think they'll then spend whatever they think they need to block it. Because I think it could be a quite popular proposal on the ballot. People are very disgusted with politics generally, the money in politics, so the environment would be supportive of that kind of proposal. So I think the utilities, if that gets on the ballot, will spend a lot of money. Now, whether they can find an effective message to spend that money on to defeat it, I don't know. And then, it's for them, it's defense in depth. If this passes, as it has in some other states, there'll be plenty of work for we lawyers.
Sure.
And I don't have a horse in this. I don't represent either side in the MMOP fight. There will be a lot of litigation over it. There'll be claims it's unconstitutional. In fact, that's kind of the fundamental claim its opponents are making already. They've framed themselves as defenders of free speech, whatever. And so, again, I just think this is the beginning of a long fight. Will it get on the ballot? If it gets on the ballot, will it pass? And then even if it passes, will it ever take effect in whole or in part? But it's an important issue. The role of money in our politics nationally and in Michigan, it's a real problem. This is one way to deal with it. And we're about to have a big old fight over whether this is the way to deal with it.
Yeah. I think you're spot on there. And I think both the citizens voting and the money out of politics have overwhelming chances of passing. They are supported by supermajorities of voters across partisan stripes here. And the kind of money that you're talking about there, if the utilities and others get behind with big money, it might not be enough to overcome a 70-80% issue. There might not be enough money. They might see that as good money after bad, or they might spend it anyway, but it might not make the difference. Same with the citizens voting. It sounds a lot better than it is to most voters. And it's going to be very difficult to defeat if it does in fact make the ballot. Neither of these would be impossible to defeat or pass, given the circumstances and what I think are the likely resources. But it becomes very difficult, and I think it becomes for most donors, it becomes do I want to give money to this? The same thing, it's not just the ballot initiatives, it's the partisan races. Republican donors aren't going to keep just opening their wallets to lose, to pay for certain losses. At some point, there's going to be a contraction of the money that's available to them. Early on, it's been there like it always has, hoping things are going to get better. But when it ain't getting better, it's not like as the summer proceeds and we get into the fall with this, that donors are going to be, opening up the checkbooks to dig deep to give another 10 grand, 100 grand, $1 million to a sure loss. But they're not going to do it. They didn't get rich by giving their money away and lighting it on fire. And that's kind of the prospect that Republicans are looking at with the partisan elections. And that's what opponents of either of the ballot initiatives might be looking at when they head into the fall.
Right. Well, just full disclosure to our listeners, I am the attorney who's fighting the so-called citizenship voting amendment. I think it's a terrible misnomer. And we'll have our fight over the summer as well, trying to keep that off the ballot.
And with that, we close out another week of political fun and games. And it's time for us to get ready for Stephen Colbert's last week on America's once proud network, CBS. In honor of Donald Trump's co-favorite late night host, both Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel say they won't do shows next Thursday night, a clear ratings path for Colbert's finale.
Walter Cronkite, we miss you. We'll close with two reminders. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do it now. And if you haven't checked out our exclusive 8647 seashell coffee mug, It's well worth visiting in the merch store, and I hope the FBI doesn't drag you away for having said that. There are links to both the YouTube channel and the merch store on our website, arepublicpodcast.com.
And if the Republic is still standing, Mark and I will be back next week. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.